Hi again, welcome back to Protect, Prevent, Preserve Your Eyes. Once again, my name is Elizabeth Nystrom, a Master of Public Health student at Michigan State University, and this is Olivia Moni, a Public Relations student at Baylor University.
We will be your guides for this educational podcast, which will look at various eye conditions, risk factors for developing these conditions, and what you can do to aid in preventing some of these conditions.
We both work for Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired, a nonprofit organization focused on helping those with vision loss thrive in a sighted world. More background information on ABVI, the services offered, and ways to donate or get involved can be found on the website abvimichigan.org.
For this final episode, we will be discussing how genetics can influence the development of eye disease, and we'll have a very special interview to help elaborate on life with vision loss. With that, let's get started. Throughout this podcast, we have been discussing various external controllable lifestyle factors. These factors, such as smoking and diet, can be modified to help protect you against eye disease and vision loss. For this segment of the episode, we will be discussing the uncontrollable factors, genetics.
In terms of cataracts, there is a form that can be inherited, and these are referred to as congenital cataracts, and they're classified based on the location and the appearance of the opacification, which is cloudiness, of the lens. Most inherited cataracts are autosomal dominant, yet some cataracts can be autosomal recessive or X-linked. When talking about genetics, autosomal dominant traits are relatively easy to pass on because only one copy of the gene is necessary. A common autosomal dominant trait would be Huntington's disease, if you've ever heard of that. Autosomal recessive inheritance requires 2 copies of the gene to be passed on, one from the father and one from the mother. The parents who carry 1 copy of this gene will not show symptoms. A common autosomal recessive trait would be sickle cell disease. Finally, X-linked inheritance primarily occurs in women because we have 2 X chromosomes, while men have an X and a Y.
Flashback to cataracts. The remaining percentage of cataracts are sporadically inherited with no direct family history. Interestingly, there are 115 genes that have been identified as being association with inherited cataracts. For reference, the human genome is over 3 billion. There have been several variants in genes that have demonstrated an association with increased risk for age-related macular degeneration, AMD. However, a variant in a very specific gene, the complement factor H gene, has been shown to increase the risk of AMD by 2.5 to 5.57 times. For reference, complement factor H influences the blood clotting pathway. Additionally, age and a positive family history for AMD are the 2 most influential risk factors for developing AMD. Studies have shown that an individual with a primary relative, such as a mother or father, with AMD is 12 to 27 times more likely to develop AMD than someone without a family history of it.
Wow, Olivia, that is sort of scary. My dad's mother had AMD, and I always worry about him getting it, especially because he doesn't get regular eye care.
We can't stress that enough. Even if you aren't experiencing changes in your vision, it's always best to see the regular eye doctor annually.
On another note, retinitis pigmentosa accounts for nearly half of all inherited retinal diseases in the United States. RP is a progressive disease of the retina, which typically begins with symptoms such as night blindness and progressive loss of peripheral vision, which can lead to loss of central vision and eventually blindness. These symptoms usually begin in adolescence and progress into adulthood. There are several forms of RP, including non-syndromic and syndromic forms, which include Usher syndrome and Bardet-Biedl syndrome. Usher syndrome is what Helen Keller suffered from, RP and deafness. There are 12 specific genes that have been associated with Usher syndrome, 17 with Bardet-Biedl, and over 50 are associated with various forms of RP.
Interestingly enough, ABVI has a volunteer, Doug, who has retinitis pigmentosa. If you're interested in learning more about what life is like with RP, reach out to us through social media and we would be happy to interview Doug in a potential future episode. Now, there are inheritable components to both early onset glaucoma and adult onset glaucoma, yet one follows more complex pathways than the other. Early onset glaucoma occurs prior to age 40 and is more likely to be inherited via single genes, whereas adult onset glaucoma follows a more complex pattern involving multiple genetic factors.
3 single genes. We will pass on educating you on the names of these genes because it's out of the scope of this podcast. But 3 single genes have been found to cause glaucoma without the influence from other genes or external factors. Additionally, greater than 20 genes have been determined to be associated with an increased risk for primary open-angle glaucoma and primary angle closure glaucoma when found in combination with other genes or external factors. For a refresher on the difference between these 2 types of glaucoma, pop back over to our first episode of the podcast where we review these in detail. Finally, familial normal tension glaucoma, the form of glaucoma that has a normal intraocular pressure, is associated with 2 rare genetic mutations. This form of glaucoma is typically inherited in an autosomal dominant fashion, meaning only 1 copy of the gene is required. These types of mutations account for approximately 2 to 3% of normal tension glaucoma cases.
In terms of populations that are most at risk for glaucoma, Asian, African, and Hispanic populations have significant prevalence rates for glaucoma, such that the risk of developing it is 3 to 5 times higher among individuals of African ancestry than among individuals of other backgrounds. Additionally, individuals of African ancestry have an increased likelihood of having a severe form of glaucoma and suffer from eventual blindness.
If you have questions about your risk of glaucoma or any of the other genetic eye diseases, talk with your eye doctor first to see if you may be at risk. Still have questions? Contact ABVI and we would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
We will now shift into the Q&A portion of our podcast. For this first interview, we will be talking with Charis Austin, ABVI's client advocate and a member of the legally blind community. Charis, welcome to the Triple P podcast. We are so happy to have you for this episode. Would you care to introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about you?
Hi, I'm Charis. I've been working at the agency for over 40 years. I'm married and I have an adult son and 2 grandchildren.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Charis. Let's dive in. How long have you been a member of the blind community?
I was born blind, so I would say all my life. I've lived in Grand Rapids since 1978.
So can you elaborate a little bit on what type of vision loss you have?
When I was born prematurely, and they did not realize at that point that if they gave you too much oxygen, it would affect your eyes.
Wow, that's actually really interesting.
Yeah.
I never knew that was like a thing.
Yes, it is, and it can happen today, too.
Still?
Still.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that.
Now it's called retinopathy of prematurity. Back when I was born, it had a really long, really different name.
So it sounds like you had to adjust to life at a pretty young age, obviously, since you were born with vision loss. So at which time in your life did you become involved with ABVI, and how did that come to be?
I was looking for a job after I graduated from college, and this was the only job that was offered, so I moved from Kalamazoo up here.
Oh, that's really interesting. So you never received services from ABVI
No.
prior to working here?
No.
Hmm.
I received services when I moved here because I had to learn the bus routes and stuff like that, but that was just kind of sort of part of the deal.
Oh, that's really cool. So
And I actually did know some people, although I didn't know it at the time.
Oh.
Before when I accepted the job, I didn't know I knew some staff.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, I mean, as ABVI's longtime advocate and support group leader, Charis has quite a bit of experience and advice to offer for those who are new to vision loss and blindness, or those who just may be struggling with acceptance. So, Charis, do you have any quick advice that you'd like to share with our podcast listeners?
Never give up. Keep trying something new. There are some people that think because I've been blind all my life, I don't experience the frustrations that people who lose their vision later do. I do, but probably on a different level. If I can't read something that I need to read at that moment, it can be frustrating. If I can't get a ride where I need to go, it can be frustrating. So get mad for the moment, but then figure out your solution.
Yeah, I kind of use that like frustration to help motivate you.
Yes, but it's okay to be frustrated.
I mean, I guess that goes for anything in life.
Yeah.
Well, it does, but people think they shouldn't be, and that you shouldn't be, and that you should be used to it, and that you should like it. I don't like my vision loss, but I deal with it.
Right, yeah. So I have a little quick scenario for you. So let's say that a sighted individual was meeting you for the first time. To be respectful and also to indicate their presence to you, how would you or another member of, the visually impaired community prefer to be approached by a sighted person? Because some people could just, stand in front of you and...
Well, the things that I hate the most, and there are people that do this because they think they're cute, is they just come up to you and they tap you on the shoulder and say nothing. Those people, I have a tendency to ignore.
I would
Because
too.
if you cannot tell me who you are, and if you think I'm going to know you after I haven't seen you for 2 or 3 years, you don't expect a sighted person to do that, so don't do that to me.
Right, yeah. So what would be the proper method that you would prefer?
Come up, maybe tap me on the shoulder and say, "Hi, this is," and then say your name.
Oh, okay. Like a normal, proper introduction.
Correct. Ask me if I need help. Don't just assume. I've had people decide to help me across the street when I didn't want to go,
I mean,
and then I had to cross the street again.
oh, yeah.
There's more to the story than that, but that's the simple, that's the one that I usually get the most.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Charis. We really appreciate you providing such valuable insight, and it was a pleasure to interview you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us once more today and listening to our podcast. This will be the last episode of the Triple P podcast for the time being. You may hear from us again in the future.
As with all of our episodes, references from this episode will be uploaded to ABVI website should any of the studies interest you. I will admit though, these ones are quite technical in their reporting. Lots of genes are mentioned. Thank you so much for listening to the Triple P podcast. If you would like to connect with us, make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at ABVI Michigan. And thanks for listening to the Prevent, Protect, and Preserve podcast.